America. My name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every week, sometimes twice a week, a little bit more than that. And until someone can give me a path, an electoral path to defeating Nancy Pelosi or Jim Clyburn, a credible one, don't tell me that the Republicans are a threat to democracy. Because let's be honest, I'm black, so which pretty much means I'm kind of stuck with the Democratic Party. And until the Democratic Party internally is believes in contested elections and competition, and it is set up in such a way that it would, out of principle, ignore superdelegates and all of these all of these obstructions to real competitive primaries and primary challenges. You can't really tell me that the Democratic Party that says, I don't want a competitive election, I want to make sure a woman is elected. I don't want a competitive election, I want to make sure that the person with the best donor base is elected. I don't want a competitive election, I want to make sure that the party loyalist, the person who's been the most loyal to the party, is nominated. I don't want them to have to deal with a competitive primary. I want to blacklist all of the people who would work towards a competitive primary. I don't want a competitive primary. I want to make sure that the candidate we nominate can beat the Republican. That's more important than the competitive primary. All of that is some form of, I want to subvert democracy and actual self-governance to get my own private aim. I care more about my own private particular will than I care about actually realizing the will of the people. I'm scared of the will of the people. So for the same reason, I have a hard time supporting something like AFT or some unions if they aren't really willing to have processes that will get rid of Randy Weingarten. I have a hard time supporting Democrats when they militate against the possibilities of a competitive primary. So if you don't have a path, if you can't tell me a credible electoral path to unseat Nancy Pelosi, if you can't have a credible electoral path to unseat Jim Clyburn, if you think that everything is okay with the fact that we nominated and got elected Dianne Feinstein, or tell me that magically there was no other person in the 39 million people who live in California, I think it might be 38 million people who live in California, who wanted to be senator, and Dianne Feinstein was the best we could do because she went through such a rigorous process, then don't tell me that the Democratic Party is the party of democracy. No, they're just the party of policies you like, and they get those policies that you happen to like through an autocratic means. And the GOP get the policies that their base happens to like through an autocratic means. And these ethical arguments about who's more committed to democratic self-governance fall flat. And I think I think they're especially obnoxious to black people who are stuck with an undemocratic Democratic Party. They can't even jump to the GOP. So yeah, the GOP is giving Elon a little bit more sway than he should. The Democratic Party wanted to rely on courts more so than on a legislative process that wanted to cede governing to an administrative state and to the courts in a way that I thought was unbecoming. I think legislators should actually adopt specific legislation. And in marginal cases, the courts should decide in the application, but for the most part, it should be so clear in the legislation that the courts and even the executives don't have that much say in the matter. But instead, our legislators don't want to legislate because that might make them unpopular with the donor base, and they let the administrative state and the courts do the work, and then the GOP takes over the administrative state and says well, this is undemocratic, or this isn't necessary, and or this is making a lot of discretionary choices that the legislative body didn't expressly articulate. So I'll just cut it, and then they'll take over the courts, right? All because politicians don't want to both advocate for or legislate in a way that actually specifically, gives us the quality of policies and governance that the nation deserves. right? So the Democratic Party fight against the rank and file, whether that fight takes the form of superdelegates, whether the fight takes the form of like, I remember going to a Democratic county meeting and they didn't want to have a debate about internal offices because it might take hurt feelings. And this is a problem. Like some people might get their feelings hurt if we have an internal debate about who should like be this office. I mean, that turns the Democratic Party into a social club that's more concerned about party members' feelings than actually like working out the quality of governance you need to take on the nation. Now, I blame feminism, but you can blame all sorts of things. The problem is you still don't have a credible path to unseat Nancy Pelosi or Jim Clyburn. You don't have a credible path. Saikat Chakraborty is running against Nancy Pelosi. He's going to get taken down because there's no credible path. She's going to have to stroke out. She's got a stronger grip on power than Saddam Hussein, who also won an election, I think in like 2004, 99%. Nancy Pelosi is just as untouchable, which is a problem. And there aren't really Democratic Party people who are militating against that as a form of securing our democracy. We had a brain dead president who was put there through some shenanigans in 2020. Everyone coordinated a dropout to fight against Bernie Sanders. So we had a brain impaired president. We had a brain dead senator, Dianne Feinstein before that, but a brain dead president, and that we had to remove through a soft coup because once again our democratic processes like said no to a primary. Said no to even talk about a primary. We said no to even talk about the primary. So is the Republican Party more anti-democratic than the Democratic Party? I don't know. It seems like a bigger tent to me. It seems like there are like multiple poles of the Republican Party that you can still vie for power because no pole has a monopoly on power. Whereas in the Democratic Party, if you're not appropriately feminist enough, if you're not appropriately blank enough, then you're just out. If you're not an appropriate corporate hack, you're out. And they have policies internally that says no one will help your campaign if you actually have a different opinion than the standing Democrat, because the Democratic Party isn't for good governance. It's against Republicans in theory, right? The Democratic Party needs to be for good governance more than it is against Republicans. That means they would foster internal debate and they want to welcome the exchange of ideas. Trump beat his people. Trump beat the party establishment of the Republican Party because the Republican Party might be in this way the more like small d Democratic Party. They actually allow insurgent outsiders to like make the case to their people in a way that's like fair and equal, in the way that Democrats will just shut down. And I was saying that, some Democrats say like, well, we just need a left Joe Rogan. We need a media personality like that. Well, first of all, Joe Rogan isn't necessarily right wing. I mean, he is what it is, but he isn't necessarily right wing. And if you had a left Joe Rogan, it might look like Bill Burr. And how long would Bill Burr last among the white women of the Democratic Party? He would last about 10 minutes before they ran him out on some BS. So the Democratic Party is actually not particularly democratic and is a smaller tent, right? But they have the nerve, the audacity to charge the Republican Party with a bigger tent for being an autocrat, for being the autocratic party. So, and like I said, this disproportionately affects black people because we can't go anywhere else credibly because the GOP just like doesn't agree ideologically with like what we think of governance as a whole. So like we should be able to find a home in the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party isn't beholden to democratic principles. So we just get choked out by rich white women. And so I think we just need a third party. And I said before that this is also my argument, like why I have a hard time advocating for unions. And I am a pro-union guy, but until AFT has a way to get rid of Randy Weingarten, like baked into the structure of the organization and advocated for by Randy Weingarten, then like it's a hard time to say that workplace democracy will actually like lead to good institutions, because those institutions just seem so casually corrupt or corrupted by the same sort of like petty politics that screws up political parties, right? So the Democratic Party needs to do some house cleaning if it's going to go on an ethical crusade. It can go on crusade based on giving people goodies, but that's not going to be a crusade for good governance, because like autocrats can give people goodies. But if you're going to go on a crusade for good governance, your house has to be a little bit cleaner with respect to your commitment to principles of democratic governance. All right. So, by the way, if you appreciate what I'm saying, which I think you should, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, $50 a month, because not everyone's going to get giving you the quality of insight that you get at this juncture, at this time in your life, so you don't squander your life, fighting the wrong battles. But I will tell you that I think it's a credible point that until you can give me a credible, viable path to defeating Nancy Pelosi, a credible, viable path to defeating Jim Clyburn, a credible excuse about why Dianne Feinstein was allowed to dodge all debates and any sort of check about her fitness and mental acuity, and a credible autopsy about how Joe Biden was not just elected in 2020, but allowed to skip any calls for a primary until the soft coup happened after the first debate. And there was nothing that changed in the party to make sure that doesn't happen again, which is the whole problem, right? So the Democratic Party wants you to hop out of the fire back into the frying pan. So we hopped from the frying pan into the fire with the GOP, and now the party is saying like, no, come back to the frying pan. And I'm just saying it's hot. I don't really care how I fry. It's just too hot in here. We need to turn down the heat. And that's the point of this show. That's the point of like this episode of this show, showing how the undemocratic party can't really make an ethical argument for democracy, because they spent so much time telling you that oligarchy and the smarties should run everything, and you dumb people should just work for oligarchy and the smarties. That was the whole theme of West Wing. The West Wing. The West Wing wasn't about, President Jed Bartlett meditating about how we need to strengthen the democratic ties of the nation so that the representatives are better representative of the people and by the people and for the people. No, the West Wing was about how the smarties and the oligarchs really know how to run the nation, and everybody else should just like be in awe of the smarties and the oligarchs. And then those same people now become Republican, and it becomes a problem. So that's a situation we're in, and it's not something that the Democratic Party is incentivized to get rid of, because, like I said, I live in Georgia right now. It's solid Republican rule. It'll be solid Republican rule as long as the Republican Party is the party of white supremacists. And if that ever flips, then there'll be other rule in Georgia. What that means is that there are a lot of Democrats in Georgia, a lot of black people in Democrats, a lot of white Democrats, a lot of liberal Democrats in Georgia too, who have made perfectly fine peace with living in Georgia. And I am one of them. Living in Georgia is not that bad. I can afford to live here. I'd rather live in Georgia than in California in just about every way. Unless I was in like a cultural center in California. But I can't afford to live in California, in a cultural center in California. So I'd rather live in Georgia, like in Athens, Georgia, than just about any other city in California. Because of, cost of living issues and the weather's nice and there are all these things. So let's not pretend that Democrats especially this variety of Democrat that doesn't like. Let's not pretend that we're not comfortable living under Republican rule, living under permanent Republican rule, because the whiny class of Democrats will be just fine living under permanent Republican rule. They'll get what they need. And, the permanent Republican rule can be orderly in that, like, with a tinge of white supremacy, but it can be orderly, and that is fine. So if Democrats are going to win the democracy argument, they can't just say Republicans are bad. You can never live in their states. Well, I can. And they can't just say Democrats are good and you can only live in their states, because what? Democrats aren't the best parents. They aren't the best builders of civil society, and they aren't the best politicians, right? Or we'd be all clamoring to go live in a Democratic state, in a Democratic city, in a Democratic state. And we can't, because we know we can't afford to live there. And it would, because those Democrats have given all the power to the oligarchs and made it untenable for others. So that's the party. That's the problem. And I say this because my big fear is that the whole U.S. becomes Georgia and the whole U.S. becomes Florida. And that's not a problem in all ways, but it is a problem for self-governance. It is a problem for self-governance. And if you care about self-governance like I do, I think that we should address that problem internally. So unless the internal mechanisms of the Democratic Party are democratic and actually like advocate for democratic measures, that means they advocate for internal debates at the primary level as opposed to militate against them. If they advocate for, an autopsy into how Dianne Feinstein could be nominated and what kind of processes we need in order to make the nomination process a little bit more open and competitive so that Dianne Feinstein isn't the one who's chosen. Unless we actually are serious about those kinds of discussions, then the Democratic Party is the problem that they charge the Republican to do. It's a different side of a problem, but it is the problem. The fact that you can make the credible argument that the GOP is the more open party is absurd, but it's nevertheless the case. All right. So thank you for your time. If you appreciate what I'm doing, which I think you should, go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month. And I'll keep doing what I'm doing because, I have other, commitments on my time, but I want to give you the quality of show that you need in order so that you don't squander your life or screw up your family. By the way, there's a sketch on Saturday Night Live about dads. Go to YouTube, find it. I think Shane Gillis was on it. Shane Gillis, dad, SNL. I might do a whole show on it because it got a lot right about the ridiculousness of parallel parenting and single family divorces and all that stuff. All right. So thank you for your time, and I will talk to you at another time. Bye.